Morning. So we're here on Chaf Aleph. But let's just review the last two lines on Chaf Beis, because the sugya for today is going to be a hemshech of what we started here, Idmar, on the bottom of Chaf Beis, and we're talking about a Kohen Gadol who is the Yavam, and now the Yevamot is obviously an almana. She falls to the Kohen Gadol for Yibum, and there is no Yibum. And the question is why? L'chora, we should have said Esei Docha Losas, and that would lead us to the conclusion that this entire din, that there's no Yibum in this circumstance, is because of a Derabanan, some sort of Zera Derabanan. Now he went ahead, the Kohen Gadol, and he had Bia with the Yevamot. And here we have Machlok Stream Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. Chad Omar, according to one opinion, the Bia is not considered a Bias Yibum. It doesn't register. We don't recognize it. Vienna Potera says Saros. So the Tzara will certainly need either Chalitza or Yibum. But Chad Omar, according to the other opinion, once the Kohen Gadol was miyavim the almana, then the Eved post facto he was kona, and therefore poteres sarasa. In other words, that second opinion has it that on a deraisa level we will apply esei dochalo. So the mitzvah of the Yibum overrides the law of v'hu almana lo yikach, and as a result, on a deraisa level, the Yibum of the Kohen Gadol in this case is a valid Yibum. And once it's valid, it passes up the tzara. The Mishnah says, choletzes flow misyabemis. Why is there no yibum if the Torah applies the principle of esei dochalos? And the answer is, it's a d'rabbanan, exera d'rabbanan. But we still have the doraisa. And once he accomplishes yibum on a doraisa level, he passes up the tzara. The other shita is going to say that, no, there's no esei dochalos. And I'll tell you why. Because in the case of Almana, she has not only a lav, but the Kohen Gadol is enjoined from having a relationship with an essay as well. And then we apply the principle of ein essay dochalos saviyes. So the Gemara says on the top of Daf Chaf Aleph that bi'almanol min anasun kliyamalo plidlo patra. Here, in the case, if she already had a relationship with her previous husband, the late Reuven, so now she's a ba'ula. In this case, there's no one who would say that the Yibum of the Kohen Gadol is valid. No one could validate that view because ein esei dochalos aviyeseh. And the Torah itself excludes Yibum in this case because the Almana min hanesuin is a combination, she's a combo of an Almana and a Bukula. Is kuliyavalo pligi de lo patra. There's no way you can apply esei dochalos aseh. So the Torah itself would object to this beer, and therefore it's invalid. And therefore the Tzara needs chalitza. Ein esei dochalos aviyeseh. Key plea, what is machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar? Bi'almana min ha'erisin. And now we're talking about a case where there is no iser esei, there's only a lav, because she's still a besula. And there's only a lav of lo yikach. Now, at this point, we would understand that we should go to the other extreme. In this case, everybody should agree, it's a hands-down situation, that the Bia would pater up the tzara because it's a valid yibum, because here there's no essay to support the los aseh, and therefore yibum will override the lotas of almana in the case of min ha'erisin. So ki pli almana min ha'erisin madiyom poteres. That's the madiyom we understand intuitively. Osi esei v'doches losas. Right? We have a principle in the Torah, esei dochalos, yibum will override the lav almana, and she's a basula, so there's no extra essay. And therefore, in such a case, certainly the tzara is exempt because there's no question about the validity of the yibum, because on a Torah level, on a deraisa level, the Torah advocates Yibum. But now we have another mandir. Uman diomer ena poteris. What happened to Esei Dochalosas? And the answer is, we're going to stand on the shoulders of Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says that if it's Efshel L'Kaim Shneim, then we don't apply Esei Dochalosas. Man diomer ena poteris lo osi essay of Yibum B'Dochi Losas of Almana L'Kohen Gadol. Even though there's only one lav here, in this case it's been a Erison, but came in the Efshel of Chalitza. As we said, he can have his cake and eat it too. He can be Makayim the mitzvah of Yibum through Chalitza without violating the lav. So in such a case, the Torah doesn't recognize the ability of the lav to override the essay. That's called Efshel Kaim Shneim. Okay then, so that's a very quick review of what we did yesterday. Meisvei, we had a brisa earlier with regard to Chayvei Lavim. Let's say we had Pitzua Daka and Krus Shvacha, etc., and the brisa says in Balu Kanu, it means that although we discourage Yibum L'Chatchila because we don't want to violate the Los Haseh, but nevertheless, the Torah would certainly recognize the Be'ilah, and therefore Kanu, he's Konahar. Through the law of Yibum, he's Konahar. And apparently this means that we're applying Esei Dochalosas. Well, what happened to Efshel L'Kaim Shneim? He could have easily given her Chalitza. And the implication of the word Kanu here is that as a result of the fact that it's a full-fledged kinyan, the Sarah does not need even a chalitza. She doesn't need chalitza. So how can you tell me that ain't Esei Dochalosas because of Efshel Kaim Shneim, Efshel of a chalitza? Then what are you going to do with this price of Imbalu Kanu? You can't argue against an explicit brisa. You're an Amora. So wait a second. This is a tiyufta against the Mandiyoma who says that Almana L'Kohen Gadol L'Bia Poteres Mitzoros. But we said that Mandiyoma, let me just get the, if you hold Yes Almana, I'm sorry. I said poteres. I meant to say ena poteres. If you hold ena poteres, then you are suspending the principle of Esei Dochalosas. And now we have a tiyufta because we have a brisa that applies Esei Dochalosas and validates the bia. So now we should go one step further, because that Mandiyomar, whoever it was, Rabbi Lozer, Rabbi Yochanan, we don't know, whatever it was, he applies the principle of Reish Lakish. What was the principle of Reish Lakish? That we suspend Esei Dochalos in a case of what? Of Efshel Kaim Shneim. So what's Reish Lakish going to do with this price? You had a secondary machlokes that didn't touch on the global fundamental Shas issue of Esei Dochalosas. It was a particular application. What happens in the case of an Almana L'Kohen Gadol? Do we apply Esei Dochalosas and therefore his Bias Yibum is valid, or do we say no, it's Efshel L'Kaim Shneim? But Efshel L'Kaim Shneim is not something that was invented in this particular limited context of Almana L'Kohen Gadol Yibum. Esei Dochalosas is halacha in Kol Tarkula. And Reish Lakish made a statement that if it's Efshel L'Kaim Shneim, let's say we suspend the principle of Esei Dochalosas. I mean, from this brisa, we see just the opposite, that Balu Kanu, it's a valid bia, and we will apply Esei Dochalosas in Yibum, despite the fact that it's Efshel L'Kaim Shneim. Lema Tevi Tiyufta Nami de Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said that there's no Esei Dochalosas if it's Efshel L'Kaim Shneim. How far are we going to go over here? If you could fulfill the mitzvah in a way that you don't violate the law, that's called having your cake and eat it. You could be makayim the mitzvah at the same time circumvent the law. Aval hacha, what are we telling you? Don't be biyamim. Alitza b'mokum yibum lav mitzvah. And you can imagine how excited I am. Because this is what I've been yelling and screaming for 2 days now. Alitza is, a no-wins, fallback situation. You're not being Mekayim Yibum, so we should really tar and feather you because your obligation is Yibum. But you know what? We're not going to leave this woman Guna for all her days and all her years because she's Yibum L'Shuk. So the Torah gave you the option of Chalitza. But don't tell me that you were Mekayim the mitzvah. When Reish Lakish says that Efshel L'Kayim Shneim, we suspend essay dovelos, that's because you can have the essay, fulfill the essay without violating the law. But here, we gave you a fallback position of chalitza so that she could get married, but that's not a kiyum mitzvah of Yibum. And the whole purpose of Yibum is lakim shin. So it comes out that we're defeating one Mandi Omar who applied the principle of Reish Lakish to Yibum, but we are defending Reish Lakish because his own principle, he would not apply to the case of Yibum, because there's not a possibility of having the mitzvah, fulfilling it, and at the same time avoiding the law. And that is the end of the sugya. Let's just see. What was the paragraph? I'm sorry, I'm going to read to myself one line just to make sure this is what I want to share with you. Also, Atzma, if Teres be yeah, I think this was it. The only problem is that you don't have page 1, right? John, you'll have it, right? Oh, you do have one. I am impressed. Guys, I really think we should have a standing ovation here for Steve. He comes in the clutch. So we're looking on the left side, the paragraph that starts Itman. Here's Rashi. Rashi is focused on that Mandi Omar who validates the bia of the Kohen Gadol as Yibum because Esei Dolchalosis. And even Reish Lakish would agree that Esei Dolchalosis in this case. So there's a ganze diuk here in the Marsha. What does Rashi indicate? Rashi says that we recognize the bias yavam of the almana and poteres es atzma, the es tzarasa min achalitza, the yotzeitz mimenu beget bilvad. Notice that Rashi emphasizes that there's a chiddush here, not only vis-a-vis the Sarah, who now is a free agent, she doesn't need chalitza because we recognize the bia and the yibum of the kohen gadol. But there's a chiddush in the Yevamot herself, meaning the woman whom what's the word I want to use? To whom or with whom he had yibum. That yotzis mimena beget bilvad. So the Maharsha says that he thinks Rashi is implying something about the other mandium who negates the validity of the bia and the yibum of the kohen gadol. They take a Maharsha midvarav shalamandi omar ena poteres es tzarasa, which means that we will not apply the principle of esei dochalosaseh. It's efshel kaim shteyen, and therefore the bia is not a bia sibu. Af hi atzma eina nifteres biyibum zeh v'lo daila beget el tzricha chalitza. I both say stop right here. In other words, if you play a game with me without cheating, don't look at the next line. Because for pedagogical purposes, I need you not to look at the next line. Will you play that game with me? Okay. The Maharsha learned something unbelievable from Rashi. That if the bia is not valid, then she herself will need chalitza. When I say she herself, let's give them names, right? We'll call it, I don't know, Sarah and Rivka, just out of the box, right? Out of the hat. The almana, the kohen gadol was miyabim Sarah. And now we're saying, Eina poteres es sarasa. So the Sarah now falls for Yibum. She can never get married without chalitza. But what about Sarah herself? Forget about Rivka. What's the status of Sarah? Give me, Rabosai, without looking at the Maharsha, give me a knee-jerk reaction. What would be your intuition? What should be the status of Sarah? Is she in the parsha of Yibum? No, because he married her through that bia. Again, it wasn't a bias Yibum, but Chach, let it be a bias Kedushin. Oh, but you'll answer me, wait a minute. How could it be a bias Kedushin? It's Chayve Lavim, a Kohen Gadol is not allowed married almana. But we have a principle that Kedushin Tosim b'Chayve Lavim. The Maharsha's deal is that this woman, we'll call her Sarah, who now was subject to a bia with the Kohen Gadol, not only will she need a get in order to marry anyone Minashur, in addition, she needs chalitza. In Yiddish, we say, Deher's the Maisa. And did you ever hear such a story? A woman who needs both a get and chalitza. Look at the words of the Maharsha. Digdei Maharsha midvarav from Rashi. Shalamad Dioma Eina Poteres es Tzarasa af hi atzma Eina Nifteres b'Yibum zeh. V'lo daila beget el tzrika chalitza. I saw these words and I jumped out of my seat. Now, you may think I'm dramatizing it, which I am, but it's very dramatic. Whoever heard such a story? That a woman needs both Yibum and chalitza at the same time. Now let's see, how did Maharsha derive this conclusion? He saw that Rashi holds that if the bia is Yibum, because we're holding Esei Dochalosa, then Rashi added a few words of Chidush here. And that is that since the mitzvah of Yibum was fulfilled on a Daraisa level, because Esei Dochalosa said, therefore she goes out with a get. So the Maharsha employs his tone, and he says, vice versa. What we see from Rashi is that if it would have been that the bia is not Yibum, then she needs chalitza. Says the Maharsha, what does that mean? That Rashi is saying, according to one mandium, that we validate the bia, so she goes out with get without chalitza. And that's all she needs to marry anyone else. But according to the other man, the Omer, she doesn't go out with the get because in addition to the get, she needs chalitza. It's from the Arabian Nights. A woman who needs both get and chalitza. He says, Tama, the Marsha, look at the Marsha's kasha. I mean, he's not exactly bothered by our kasha. He says, Lama hu machlokas linyanat sarah v'lo ba b'atzma. Okay, he makes a diuk here that the Gemara in the language says that Chadomar poteris sarah, so the Chadomar poteris sarah. So any mention about she herself, about Sarah, the whole discussion revolves exclusively about Rivka. Does she need chalitza? Does she not? Wait a minute. Why don't you ask a more fundamental question? Does Sarah need chalitza? No. Sarah doesn't need chalitza. All she needs a get. She needs chalitza. Al kain piresh shehi atzma vade niknes biyibum zeh benases ki ishto l'chol davar sharei kedushin posted b'chayvin lamen. You can't tell me that she's not an HSH. You know, the interesting thing is the language here bothers me. He says, Vade niknes biyibum. So I would have said the biyazu, I think would have been a more, accurate language. It's not yibum. We're going to tell them on the Omer that there is no yibum here. The Torah would not be doche the lav of almana for the sake of yibum. So it's not yibum. And haraya the Torah needs chalitza. But the biyazu, niknes. Why? Because kedusha tosa b'chayvei lav. Now, Steve, you asked me a question at the end of Shir. Do you remember the question? Because now's the perfect time to ask that question.
If it was yes.
How do I give you a hint? How do I give you a hint without giving away the answer? When I was in ninth grade, I went to a Yeshiva University High School for Boys in Manhattan. I had a Rebbe named Rabbi Michael Hecht. Name mean anything to anybody? If you were a lawyer and a graduate of YU, Yeshiva College in Circle, he was the advisor for the law department. But anyway, so he was my Rebbe in ninth grade. And Shlipa, he's alive and well, Baruch Hashem. So Rabbi Hecht had the uncanny ability of saying just enough, but without giving away the answer. So how can I do that? Let me start a sentence and see if you'll finish. Okay, this is my joke. If I hold ein esei docha losas, and there's no yibum, well, look, can you finish my sentence? Then there should be an erev text. Of what? Now watch what's going on over here. The Marsha is addressing the Manti-Omer who says that there's no Esei Dochalosas there. So the Torah is saying, do not be miyabim this woman. And the Marsha says, no, if he went and he had beer with her, all she needs to get, she doesn't need chalitza. Why? Because Kedushin Tosim B'chayvei Lav. Wait a minute. What do you mean Chayvei Lav? This is not Chayvei Lav. True, Allah L'Kman is Chayvei Lav, but if there's no Yibum, he is marrying the wife of his sister. I'm sorry. He is marrying the wife of his brother. It would be pretty tricky if you could marry the wife of your sister. Right? Today, anything goes. But I'm saying, back in the day, in the old traditional marriages. So it would seem, to answer, this was your question, I don't know if you remember, this was your question at the end of the Yeshir yesterday. You don't remember, I remember, that the Marsha doesn't hold like that. The Marsha is saying something, I don't know how to say it in a very smooth way. It's not so smooth, it's not black. He's saying that it's not that, there's no Zikas Yibum at all, and she becomes an Eishes Ach. He's saying there's a temporary blockage here. You cannot fulfill the mitzvah even because ein esei docha losas in this case, because efshel kaish. So the lotas becomes like a barrier and an impediment that doesn't allow you to be mayam in this one. But there's no erev of Eishes Ach. And the truth is that we could support that view. It just occurred to me. 1 second. Let's go back. See how far do I have to go back? In the Masifta, you want to go back a half an hour, you have to turn 5 pages. But let's see. Oh, the Iser Kedusha on Daf Chof Amid Aleph in the Mishnah, Choletzes V'lomas Yavemes. Gemara interpreted Iser Kedusha means Chayve Lavin, and yet we require Chalitza. If you're going to require Chalitza, then by definition, there's no Erev of HSA. You can't have your cake and eat it. You can't have both. Okay, but we're going to come back and visit this again and again. Okay, Biresha, he atzma vaday niknes biyibum zeh v'naseis ki ishto l'chol dover shari kedushin totzin v'chayvim lav. V'alkein af al pi shelo mekayim ba mitzvahs yibum. Oh, see, we sometimes we go in the right direction. Mikol makom poka zikos. That's not exactly. No. I'm sorry. I thought we were going in the same path, but no. So I think we're falling ways. To become makom, he wants to explain why, according to Rashi, she doesn't need what? She doesn't need chalitza. She does not need chalitza. But yet he's saying pokas, but she's not an H's. So it's an amazing thing. He's saying it doesn't take a mitzvah yibum in order to be mafkia the zika. You could be mafkia the zika with kedushay bia, without yibum. I think what he's saying is, this is a little bit reminiscent of what we said about Sarah Ashes Ruvain. Ruvain dies, and then Shimon is miyavim. Remember this, Mitch? We went over this 50 times, so this is old hat, right? Shimon is miyavim Ashes Ruvain, Sarah, and then Levi is born. So we said there's no Isser Ashes Ach for Levi, even though it's Achiv Shalai beloved visibly Ruvain, because Shimon's Ishus replaces Levi, right? Replaces Ruvain's Ishus. Why do I mention that? Because here also, what happens is that he has beer with this woman, Sarah, and now he creates an ishus which somehow swallows up the chalitza, if you follow me, the zika. The zika gets lost by the ishus. Mm-hmm. So the ishus to Shimon swallows up, Shimon is now the Kohen Gadol, right? Swallows up the zika to Reuven, such that now Sarah has ishus with Shimon, the Kohen Gadol, and she has zippo with Reuven. And therefore she doesn't even need chalitz. That's what I think he means by poka zikos. Are you willing to accept that? Is my analogy on target. But now we still have to figure out what happens to the erev of ishus. So if we're going to say that what? That the bia could create ishus, Mamela, she's not ishus. Yeah, but that we're just running around our tail with our tail. It's a vicious cycle. How can you tell me that the yibum now replaces the zika? Again, I don't want to use the word yibum here. Let's call it kedushay bia replaces the zika. I could understand that if I would grant you the premise that the ishus is valid, but why is ishus valid? I mean, if the Torah doesn't allow for yibum in this case, then she's an ishus. You understand what I mean? Mm-hmm. You're putting tomorrow before today, which you can't do, right? Tomorrow's tomorrow, today is today. Tomorrow is not yesterday. So you're telling me that tomorrow she's an ishus ish to Shimon, to the Kohen Gadol. And therefore, yesterday, when he was Makadish, she was not an Eishesah. I don't get how that works. it doesn't bother me for me to say that once I validate the Kiddushin through that Bia, which is not a Bia Sivu, then the Zika goes, it flies and disappears. That I can accept. But how is that Kiddushin Chal? How did it get off the ground? What happened to the Isser of Eishasah? But then on the other hand, we said that there was a Zika, Harayish, and needs Chalitz. So just 1 second. So then there was a Zika Sivum, but he pushed the envelope, and now he has issues. And the Zika Sivum was enough to remove, to alleviate the Erev of Eishasah. Does that make sense? Let's just, I think I have it. Let me just see if I have it. It does have a Zikas Yibum until the issues. And the proof of the pudding is that she needs Chalitza. But now he creates issues. And how does that issues get off the ground? What happened to the Erev of Eishasah without a mitzvah Yibum? The answer is that the Zika itself is enough to remove. What does that mean? I don't get it. No, I'm sorry. I fooled myself into thinking. Maybe I could have fooled you, but I can't fool myself. What I just said is foolish.
No.
Yeah, what do you say, Jen?
Makes sense. Zika, that is the initial thing that so it's in place at that point. So,
but my question to you is, Zika removes Eishes Ach because of the mitzvah of Yibum. No, what is the Torah saying about Zika? It's the Torah saying that as a result of the fact that your brother died without children, now you're connected to this woman.
In a permissible way. Through Yevamot, still it becomes around by the Zika.
No, you might be right. I mean the truth is that you have to be right because I don't have another answer to this, but I understand how it works. A man is Ba'al Eishes Achiv without a mitzvah of Yibum, but because there's a Zika L'chalitza is sufficient to remove the Erev of Eishes Ach, his Memela, his Ishus is and now all she needs to get, she doesn't need Chalitza because once Ishus is it removes the Zika. See, a lot of what we're discussing comes back to that same point that always bothers me, that somehow the Gemara is comfortable with splitting between Zikas Chalitza and Zikas Yibum. I mean, obviously we're saying that because we hold that Isser Kedusha and Ein Esidot Halosas that removes Yibum, but yet she needs Chalitza. So we see that there is such an entity as an independent Zikas Chalitza, where there's no Zikas Yibum. So we see, that's what bothered me a few days ago. How can you have Chalitza without Yibum? I never quite felt comfortable with that. But you see that's.
So is there a distinction between a Zika Chalitza and Zika? Or is it just Zika?
If you would ask me, I would have said it's just Zika, but you see, it's not that way. There's a fundamental distinction. I'm going to talk about a case where there's no Zikas Yibum, but there is Zikas Chalitza. And then I'm going to ask you, would Zikas Chalitza, as an independent Zika, would that have the power to remove the status of Eishes Ach? Because I always thought it's the mitzvah of Yibum. In fact, you may recall that at the beginning of this Masechet, the Gemara wanted to derive from Yibum that Esei Dochalosas. But what does that mean? That means he's having a relationship with Eishes Ach. You can't deny that. But the Torah says that's the mitzvah. And from that, we're going to derive the universal conclusion that Esei Dochalosas, even perhaps the Gemara says against the Nisa Karas, not even a regular law. In other words, Yibum could be a source for a radical conclusion that Esei Dochalos says Sheish Bo Kare. At the end, the Gemara derives from Shabbos. I don't remember all the, we have to go through the Gemara, but so it was all coming from the essay. And now you're talking about a case where there is no essay. I don't know. Okay, so that's this goes on and on. All right, so hold on to the page. Maybe we'll come back to it in the future. But now let's go back to the Gemara, okay? You know what I say about this Masechet? I feel great and exuberant when I take one step forward and then I take two steps back. Really. Amar Rav. Now the Gemara tells on the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that there's something called Shnios LaRayos. So in the Mishnah at the beginning of the Masechet we had the Arayos to Arayos, and now we're going to talk about the Arayos, the Rabbana, which are called Shnios, which are like secondary Arayos. Omar Rava Remez L'Shnios Min HaTorah Minayin. Now I have to tell you that the language of Rava here is, in my mind, a pella. We're talking about a Rabbana. The Torah permitted this. It's not an error. So what do you mean Remez Min HaTorah Minayin? Well, what is Rava searching for? I mean, let's say, for example, the Mishnah says at the end of Masechet Avodah Zarah that you're not allowed to drink chol of ak, or you're not allowed to drink yayin, stam yain. Should I open up the Gemara at the end of Avodah Zarah and expect to find in the Gemara Remez liyayin l'stam yaino min haTorah minayin? Again, yayin nesach is a part of the Torah, yain sicham, etc., whatever it says there. But yayin nesach is Gzeira d'Rabbanan. We have thousands of Gzeiras d'Rabbanan. Can you imagine learning Masechet Shabbos, which is so full, like there's probably more d'Rabbanan than d'Oraisos, and asking Remez min haTorah minayin? I had a chiddush in a Gemara in Kiddushin. The Gemara in Kiddushin, at the end of Kiddushin, says, Remez liyichud min haTorah minayin. Most Rishonim, including the Rambam, hold that yichud is only d'Rabbanan. There was a Gzeira of David HaMelech, etc., whatever it was, there were different Gzeiras over the course of time. First, yichud with an Erev, and then yichud with a Pruya, yichud with a Nachris. I mean, there were like 3 different periods of time. So the same question I'm asking you now, I asked myself then, and I came to the following conclusion: that the Torah says, "Vel isha betumas didasa lo sikra." So what does that mean, lo sikra? I'm walking down the street, and this woman is in nida. I have to cross the street. And they say about Rav Kook, the first she found me that, if a woman came down the street, you would cross the street. But I'm not on that level of piety. I've finished, such a great chassid like Rav Kook. So what does lo sikru mean? So Remez li yichud min haTorah means that even if yichud is only d'Rabbanan, but the Rabbanan are now expanding the definition of lo sikru. Maybe the Torah holds lo sikru el isha betumas nidosa only beer, chilas beer, what was spoken. But the Rabbanan are coming now to expand the Doraisa. It's not like Gzeira. Gzeira means I'm afraid that if you do X, you might come to do Y. But I'm not willing to say that because that every single Gzeira means that there's a Torah law, and I'm expanding the Torah law. Right. But what we're saying is remez min Torah that lo sikru could also be expanded, although it remains a drabanan because, like you said, lo sikru legalos erva, gili erva, which is beer. But what I'm suggesting is that yichud is not. I'll give you. There's a Zayas Ranon. He was one of the Gedolim 150, 200 years ago. He was asked a question today in our contemporary society. It's so relevant. Can an elderly man hire a helper in the house? I don't want to mention any nationality. Maybe that's not politically correct, but there happens to be one nationality they're absolutely fantastic at this. I don't know if it's in the genes or what. And I've seen it with my own eyes, and my mother always showed me. But any of it, he had a shaila of yichud. So he asked the Zayis Ranon, and he told the Zayis Ranon that the Rofim have determined that he cannot perform sexually. He's too old. And the Zayis Ranon says it's awesome. Now, I'm not saying we have to pass the one, because it has tremendous repercussions. I mean, I don't wish it on anyone here, but this is what goes on. What sense do you make out of that? I mean, he's not trusting the Rofim. I mean, I don't know, Chazal, you open up the Gemara, here, there, and elsewhere, and Yuma especially, I'll trust the Rofim. So if the Torah says lo sikru legalos erva, there's no shaychus here. Bottom line, what I'm trying to suggest that remez min Torah minayim means that we're not addressing a classic zera. The Torah says asu mishmeres l'parti. Actually, in Parshas told us, I think it is. But where's the pasuk? Help me out here. Leman asher yitzam is one of this day or so. Is that in Toldus or is this before Vayerim? So in any event, it says about Avram Avinu. So Chazal say that the word mishmeres in that pasuk is a remez to the fact that Avraham observed all the gzeros through Avram. Right? Asu mishmeres l'mishmarti, which is a pasuk in Parshas Truma. So the Torah mandates the Chachamim, not you and I, but the Chachamim to create shmirim, to create harchakos. And L'chora Shnius Larais could be a perfect example of that. And what I'm suggesting that from the language of the Gemara of Rava, you see that that's not so. That Shnius Larais is not Xera. It's Xera, then Rebonishim. Every single Xera you can ask me, Remez min Torah minayim. Shenemar, he has kol hatoevos ha'el, asu anshe ha'oretz. And the Gemara now, Rav is going to find a remez in the word ha'el to shnios. So the Torah is admonishing the people of Israel not to learn and not to imitate from the Goyim that occupy the land. Correct? Why? Because the Goyim are guilty of toevos. And what word does he add to the word toevos? He adds the word ha'el. Now the word el comes from the word alim. Like, for example, if I'm not mistaken, Mitch, correct me if I'm wrong, in the Shira Sayam, doesn't it say Eli Moav? Yeah, it means the mighty officers or commanders of Moab. So God is also called Aleph Lamed, which means the mighty one. Now, whenever you use the word mighty, it's an adjective that has an opposite. It has like I wouldn't say an opposite, but if I say that you have $200, then it means that Shimon has only 100 amos. Do you follow? So if I classify something as Eli or Ele, that means it's very strong, very intense, and it implies that there's something called rakos. Michlal dika rakos, ma'iniu shnios. And now the Gemara is going to embark on a whole etymological analysis of the word Ele and Eli, so forth and so on. But before we get to that, I just want to point out that the Gemara is finding, Rav is finding a remez in the concept of toevos. The word toevos refers to harayos. And that's what the nations of that occupied Palestine, that's what they were guilty of. And the Torah is saying, stay away from them. But the Torah says that if we describe their toevos, they are Elah meaning kashos. And the implication is that there's a drop level of rakos. And that is shnios larais. Again, we're not saying that shnios larais are dorais. Just because the Torah says that there is such an entity within the constellation of toevos, that there's toevos of the first order, the most severe toevos, and then there's a lower level of toevos. But that lower level is also classified as toevos. And once again, I submit to you that Lefiani is daiti, this is not exer. For two reasons. First of all, because why is Rava looking for a remez? Secondly, we're saying something much more fundamental than exer. We're not saying that if we allow you to do X, you'll come to do Y, but we're broadening the definition of toevos. There are toevos kashos and toevos rakos. Even Yaakov hiksha madua eina gemara mochicha me'aposek hanemer b'Torah elei moa. The Gemara is going to embark now on a study of the word Elah or Ha'el and Atovos Ha'el. What about Eli Moa? The Tirei Shaya Efshel Farish Posik Zeh Al Hachaloshim Va'Beinon. Okay, so we're now very, shall we say, innocent. We don't know what the word El means. I just don't understand. I mean, God Himself is described as Kel. So how could that mean Giborim? I guess maybe when it's used for God, it has a different usage. I don't know. Well, there's an interesting footnote here from the Nitziv. Rabosai, the Balei HaTosfos are very famous for distinguishing between two classes of Durabanim, of Isurim Durabanim. One is called Yesh Lo Iker Min HaTorah, and one is called Ein Lo Iker Min HaTorah. So, for example, according to one Tana, I think it's Reb Shimon, if I remember correctly, Chulin shenishchetu ba'azara. So he took chulin into the azar and he shechted it. Also, the Tanoim hold that to eat that meat is a chiyuv karetz, and Reb Shimon says no, it's mutar min haTorah, it's only asid rabban. And Tosfos says that whereas if muktzah would fall into a taromus, it would be batel. It would be batel. Again, you have another problem. What's called davar sheish l'matir. But leaving that aside, in principle, muktzah would be batel. But chulin shenishchetu ba'azara, according to Reb Shimon, is not batel. Why? Says Tosfos that even though chulin shenishchetu ba'azara like muktzah is d'Rabbanan, according to Reb Shimon, but nevertheless, chulin shenishchetu ba'azara is yesh lo ikar min haTorah. Why? Because you have something called shchutei chutz, which means if you take kachim out of the azara, the Torah says explicitly, no one doubts this, that you chayv kares for eating them. And now we're just applying it in the other direction. So anyway, Tosfos calls it yeshlo iker min haTorah. But muktzah, he says, is ain't no iker min haTorah. There's no source in the Torah for muktzah. And you see that Tosfos is upgrading the status of a Rabbanan called yeshlo iker min haTorah. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if you'll find this in Tosfos, maybe other Rishonim, if you have Trumas Yerakos, which is only the Rabbanan, or Perasa Elon, maybe with the exception of Zeitzvah, no, but anyway, Perasa Elon, then that's called Yeshlo Iker Min HaTorah, because the Torah says that Truma is prohibited. You mafresh Truma de Rabbanan. And it's called Yeshlo Iker Min HaTorah. So that's what the Netziv is saying over here, that when Rava asks the question, Remez Shnias Larayas Min HaTorah Minayin, he wants to know if we can classify our Shnias Larayas as Yeshlo Iker Min HaTorah. And I would like to compare or make a close analogy between what the Netziv is saying and what we're saying. And we were saying that we're looking not for a Gzera, but for an expansion of the Torah law. That's called Yeshlo Iker Min HaTorah. Again, it's the Rabbanan at the end of the day, but it's an upgraded Rabbanan. It's not like your classic Rabbanan that's Batal in the Tarot. Here, it's not going to be Batal in the Tarot. And why? What makes it more Chamor? Because it's not a Gzera. It's Yeshlo Iker Min HaTorah. Or the way we said it, it's an expansion of a Torah program. My mashma de ha'el, right? It says Tawevos ha'el, lishna de kashahu, Ichsiv, Paskin Yechezkel, with regard to Melech Bavel, and Yerushalayim, ve'es eli ha'aretz laka. So in that case, it can't refer to Chaloshim and Beinanim. It has to be referring to what? Giborim Utkifei Aretz, because Yechezkel is describing the king of Bavel who's attacking Yerushalayim with his greatest officers that are so powerful. In other words, he sent forth his crack unit, his crack battalion. So they are Hazaki. So the Gemara asks, Lema Pliga de Rabbi Levi. Is there a machlokis now between Rav and Levi? The Amar Rabbi Levi, Kasha Onsham Shel Midos Yosem Yonshin Shel Arayos. Shezeh Nemar Bahen El, Vezeh Nemar Bahen Ele. Okay, so in the parsha of Midos, that means Vaichitu, because the measuring scales are off. And the Torah says about that, Ki tavas Hashem Elokecha kol osei ele. In Arayos, it only says el and not ele. This requires a lot of study here, but let's just get it on a superficial level. Again, the pasuk in Arayos says what? Let's go over it again. It says ki es kol hatoevos ha'el, and the pasuk in Midos says ki tavas Hashem Elokecha kol osei ele. So we're comparing el to ele. And Rabbi Levi says that Ela is worse than El. In other words, on a scale of Rach all the way up to Kasher, the highest level of Kasher, El is a little bit lower than Ela. Ela is like the worst Toev, and that's Midos. Which, by the way, in and of itself is fascinating, because Midos is Beinodim Lechavero. I'm not sure what Arayos is. I mean, Arayas could also be bein adam l'chavero if, let's say, she's a married woman. But let's say if she's not a married woman, so then it's bein adam l'makom, we would say. In fact, I think the Rambam explicitly in Hilchos Tshuva, I have to look it up. If you want to bring me around, maybe I'll find it. I think the Rambam explicitly says that erva is bein adam l'makom. And here we're saying, according to Rabbi Levi, that a violation of bein adam l'chavero is even worse than bein adam l'makom. Yeah, I don't know how does that calculate, what's the word, with the fact that in bein adam l'chavero, like midos, you're not chayiv kares, certainly not Mrs. Bezdin. For an Arab, you might be chayiv Mrs. Bezdin, but certainly kares. I don't know. Maybe he's making a statement on a moral level. Because he's not identifying which sin is more chum. It could be that erva, insofar as it's an Isur Kares, is more chum than cheating someone and stealing his money. But on a moral level, it's more disgusting to take advantage of someone and cheat him with mishkalos than it is to have a bias erva. So the Gemara answers, El kasha ve'ela kasha me'el. There's no kasha in Rava. Rava is not a contradicting Rabbi Levi. Rava is agreeing to Rabbi Levi that Ela is worse than El, and therefore Midos is worse than Arayos. But that doesn't mean that the word El doesn't indicate kasha, implying that there's rakos. So the Gemara asks a kasha now on Levi, Rabbi Levi, Rabbi Arayos nami hoksiv Ela. You're building a case on the fact that in Midos it says Ela, whereas in Arayos it only says what? El, but that's not true. Even in Arayos we have a pasuk Ela. Where's this pasuk? 1 second. Until now we quoted the pasuk Yes, kol hatoevas ha'el. Do you have a footnote to tell you where that pasuk is? I remember there's a pasuk that says Mikol hatoevas ha'el. What's that? Achrimos? Yeah, whatever. I agree with you. It's one of the two. So it says Mikol Toevas Ha'elim, right? So that seems to punch a hole into Rav Levi's whole thesis here. So Gemara says, Ahu, no, is that pasuk you're quoting in Arayos, where it says Ha'ela, Midos Mikares. I guess he's saying that there are different categories of arayos. Or maybe he's saying that arayos, maybe he's saying exactly what we were saying before, that on a moral level, perhaps midos is more chomer of a violation, but if from the perspective of onshim, certainly arayos is on a higher level. It's a chiv kares. So what was Rabbi Levi talking about when he set up midos as being more chomer than arayos? if he himself admits that if the barometer is onshim, then certainly arayis is more common than midos. So the Gemara explains that hani efshar b'tshuva v'hani lo efshar b'tshuva. Interesting. So from the perspective of chumras ha'avera, enochinami arayis is more common. But arayis has one kula, one leniency that you won't find by midos, even though midos is not a chiyuv kares, and that is that whereas arayis is efshar b'tshuva, but midos is lo efshar b'tshuva. And he quotes here the Rashbam. He says, "Kevin shegazel min harabim eni yodei lemila hash." Right? He's got bad midos, so everybody who comes in gets cheated. So go figure out. You know the famous story about the Chafetz Chaim. You know the Chafetz Chaim had a mini market, what we would call, and his wife ran it. And there was one occasion, I think they found out that something was off with the scale. So the Chafetz Chaim took masses of produce and he declared them hefker. I don't know if he went bankrupt as a result, I don't know. Because he wanted to guarantee himself, which you can't know for sure, that the one that amongst all the people who got cheated, they would all be repaid by taking them a hefker. But I mean, you see how a pious person go to the extreme end of the world in order to do tshuva. But generally speaking, go run around. Actually, there's a machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon. Do you remember this? Where a man steals from one of 5 people. And I forget who holds what. One Tana holds that he has to return the gzela to all 5. And the other says, Meinach Beinam, Yistalem, just go in front of them, let them play snatch the bed, muscle men. But if you hold, maybe it's Rabbi Tarfon, I'm not sure. You imagine the case of midos, how do you fulfill that din that you stole from who knows who, and you have to go back and pay them back? Okay, Rabbos, I guess this is where we'll stop for today. We've gotten in a lot here.